Welcome to Speak Easy English. Today's story is about loneliness, storms, light, and the power of hope. Far away from the noise of the city, on a small rocky island in the middle of the cold sea, there stood an old lighthouse. And in that lighthouse lived an old man named Thomas. For 40 long years, Thomas had been the keeper of the light. His job was simple but very important. Every evening, when the sky turned dark, he climbed the long, winding stairs to the top of the lighthouse. There he lit the great lamp. The light shone far across the water. It told the ships, "Here are the rocks. Stay away. This way is safe." Many ships had passed safely in the night because of that light. Many sailors had reached home because an old man kept his promise. Thomas was alone now. Long ago, his wife had lived with him on the island. They had been happy together. They had one son, named Daniel. In those early days, the island was full of life. In the summer, the family planted a small garden behind the lighthouse. Daniel would run along the rocks, chasing the seabirds and laughing in the wind. In the evenings, the three of them would sit at the top of the lighthouse and watch the sun melt slowly into the sea. Thomas would lift his little son onto his shoulders and say, "One day, my boy, you will keep this light, just as your grandfather and I have done." Daniel would clap his small hands, and his mother would smile. Those were the happiest years of the old man's life. But the sea was a hard place to live. When Daniel grew up, he wanted a different life. He wanted the city, the crowds, and the bright lights of the streets. One cold morning, Daniel and his father had a terrible argument. "This island is a prison," Daniel had shouted. "You love this old lamp more than you love me. I am leaving, and I will never come back." And he had taken a boat to the city and gone away. Thomas had stood on the rocks that morning and watched his son's boat grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared over the edge of the sea. He had wanted to call out, to say that he was sorry, to ask his son to stay. But pride had held his tongue, and the wind had carried his silence away. He told himself that Daniel would write a letter soon. He told himself that his son would come home when the city grew tired of him. But the letters never came, and the years passed by like the endless waves. Years passed. Thomas's wife grew sick and died. Daniel did not come, even then. The old man was left all alone with the wind, the waves, and the light. Some nights, the loneliness was so heavy that Thomas could hardly breathe. But every single evening, no matter how sad he felt, he climbed the stairs and lit the lamp. The island became a very quiet place. There was no laughter on the rocks now. The little garden grew wild and forgotten. At night, Thomas would cook a small meal for one, and the empty chairs around his table seemed to grow larger every day. Sometimes he spoke out loud, just to hear a voice, even if it was only his own. But the old man did not let his sadness defeat him. Each evening, he had a reason to climb the long stairs. Each evening, the light needed him. And so he kept going, one day at a time. "Why do you still do it, old man?" the fishermen sometimes asked when they passed by. "Nobody would blame you if you rested. You are old now." Thomas always gave the same answer. "I made a promise to the sea," he said. "As long as I am alive, this light will not go out." Somewhere out there, someone is lost in the dark. And a small light can guide a lost soul home. I will not take that light away from them. The fishermen would shake their heads and call him a stubborn old man. But in their hearts, they respected him. For they knew that on the darkest nights, when the sea turned cruel, it was the light of this lonely old keeper that stood between them and the rocks. More than one fisherman owed his life to Thomas and his faithful lamp, though the old man never asked for a single word of thanks. So the years went on. The old man grew weaker, but the light grew no dimmer. He cleaned the glass until it sparkled. He saved every drop of lamp oil with great care. The light was his life, and it was his hope. One night, many years before, the old keeper had been given a reason he would never forget. A great ship, lost in heavy fog, had been drifting straight toward the deadly rocks. Thomas had seen it from his tower and had kept his light burning as bright as he could, ringing the old warning bell again and again into the night. At the last moment, the ship had seen the light, turned away, and been saved. The next morning, the captain of that ship had rowed all the way to the island just to shake the old man's hand. "You saved 100 lives last night, keeper," the captain had said, with tears in his eyes. 100 families will see their fathers and sons again because of you. Thomas had never forgotten those words. On the loneliest and darkest nights, when he wondered if his quiet life had any meaning at all, he would remember that captain's face and the 100 families, and he would find the strength to climb the stairs and light the lamp once more. From that day on, the old man came to see his lonely duty not as a punishment, but as a sacred trust. He was not merely the keeper of a lamp. He was a keeper of lives, a guardian standing watch over the dark and dangerous sea so that others might pass safely home. A single light in the darkness, he would whisper to himself, is never a small thing, and that knowledge gave a deep and quiet pride to even his hardest and most solitary nights. One winter evening, the sky turned a strange color. The clouds were dark and heavy. The wind began to howl like a wild animal. The old fishermen looked at the sea and shook their heads. "A great storm is coming," they said. "The biggest in many years. No boat should be on the water tonight." One by one, the fishermen tied their boats and locked their doors. That night, the storm came with all its fury. The rain fell like stones. The wind screamed and shook the lighthouse walls. The waves rose as high as mountains and crashed against the rocks. Thomas climbed the stairs, slower than before, and lit the lamp. The light cut through the storm like a sword of gold. Then, through the rain and the darkness, Thomas saw something. Far out on the angry sea, there was a small fishing boat. It was tossed up and down by the giant waves. Someone was out there. Someone was lost in the storm. The old man's heart filled with fear, not for himself, but for the stranger on the water. "Hold on," he whispered. "Follow the light. Follow it home." He turned the lamp toward the boat, so its beam would point the way to the safe path between the rocks. But then a new and terrible problem came. The great lamp began to flicker. The oil was running low. Thomas checked his store of oil, and his heart sank. There was almost none left. In a few minutes, the light would die. And without the light, the little boat would surely crash upon the rocks and be lost forever. Thomas did not waste a single second. He ran down the stairs as fast as his old legs could carry him. He grabbed every oil lamp from his rooms. He poured all of it into the great light. It was still not enough. He looked around in despair. Then his eyes fell on his old wooden furniture, the chairs and the table he had used for 40 years. Without stopping to think, the old man began to break the furniture into pieces. He carried the wood up the long stairs, again and again, his arms shaking. He fed the wood and the last of the oil into the flame. He even took the old books he loved and the wooden frame of his wife's picture, and he burned them too. "Burn," he cried into the storm. "Burn bright. Just a little longer. Show him the way." His old hands were full of cuts from the broken wood. His back ached, and his breath came in painful gasps. An old man should have been resting by the fire on such a terrible night. But Thomas did not stop, not even for a moment. He had given 40 years to this light, and he would give it his last strength too. "A promise," he whispered to himself, "is a promise." The light blazed up, strong and golden, cutting through the rain. Out on the sea, the little boat saw it. Slowly, painfully, the boat turned toward the light. It followed the golden path between the deadly rocks. The waves pushed it, and the wind fought it, but the boat held on. Inch by inch, it came closer to the island. At last, the boat reached the safe water near the lighthouse. A young man, soaked and shaking with cold, pulled himself onto the rocks. He had survived. The light had saved his life. Thomas hurried down to help the stranger. He wrapped the young man in a warm blanket and brought him inside, near the small fire. The young man could hardly speak. He looked up at the old keeper to thank him. And then both men froze. The old man looked at the young man's face. The young man looked at the old man's face. For a long moment, neither could say a word. "Father," the young man whispered. It was Daniel. After all these years, it was his own son. For a long moment, the old man could not speak. He had imagined this meeting 1,000 times in his quiet dreams. But never like this, never out of a deadly storm, never with his son half frozen and gasping for breath. He fell to his knees and took his son's cold face in his trembling hands, just to be sure that his tired eyes were not playing tricks on him. Daniel had become a fisherman in a faraway town. That day, his boat had been caught by the great storm far out at sea. He had given up all hope. He had been certain he would die. And then, in the darkest moment, he had seen a light. A single, golden light shining from an island. He had not known whose light it was. He had only followed it, because it was the only hope he had. "I followed the light," Daniel said, with tears falling down his cold cheeks. "I did not know it was your light, Father. You saved my life. After everything I said to you, after all these years I stayed away, you still kept the light burning. You still saved me." The old man held his son in his arms for the first time in many years. "I never stopped waiting for you," Thomas said softly. "Every night, when I lit this lamp, I prayed that somewhere it might guide you home. Tonight, my prayer was answered." They sat together by the small fire while the storm slowly faded outside. The old man had lost his furniture, his books, and his last drops of oil. The room was almost empty now. But he had never been so rich in all his life. He had his son back. When morning came, the storm was gone. The sea was calm and silver under a soft sky. Father and son stood together at the top of the lighthouse, looking out at the quiet water. "I am sorry, Father," Daniel said quietly. "I wasted so many years being angry. I thought the city would give me everything I wanted. But it could never give me what I lost on the day I left this island." The old man shook his head gently. "Do not look back with sorrow," he said. "The storm is over now. You are home. That is all that matters to an old man's heart." Daniel never left again. He stayed on the island and learned to keep the light, just as his father had done. And on quiet evenings, the old man would tell him the lesson he had learned in 40 years of keeping the lamp. "In this life," Thomas said, "everyone goes through dark and stormy nights. There will be times when you feel lost, when you cannot see the way, when you want to give up. In those moments, do not curse the darkness. Be the light. Keep your light burning, even when no one is watching. Because you never know whose life that small light will save. And you never know who might be trying, at last, to find their way home." And that is the story of the lighthouse keeper's promise. A story that reminds us that as long as we keep hope alive and never let our own light go out, even the darkest storm can lead us back to the ones we love.